Doers, Senior Director of Judiciary and Democracy, Doug Lindner. Demand Justice Executive Director, Brian Fallon. And on behalf of the entire Court Expansion Coalition, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our newest endorser, Planned Parenthood Action Fund. Thank you to Jacqueline Ayers, Senior Vice President of Policy Campaigns and Advocacy, for joining us here today. I would also like to acknowledge the work of so many who are building the momentum for court expansion in cities and states across the country. In particular, the Just Majority Coalition and your 40 partner organizations, including leaders like Take Back the Court, who are rapidly making court expansion the consensus in the United States of America. Our message is simple, but its consequences are woven into the fabric of every right of every person in every community across this nation. Our most fundamentally held freedoms are under attack from an illegitimate far-right United States Supreme Court. And if we fail to act, it will only get worse. We must fix this broken and illegitimate court. We must expand the United States Supreme Court. So how did we get here? How did we get to a place where the United States Supreme Court is no longer the venerable institution it once was? Why does poll after poll show that record numbers of Americans have lost faith in and respect for the court? We're here because beginning in 2016, Senate Republicans broke the rules and packed the court. And in 2020, Donald Trump helped them to break the rules again. They started by breaking the rules for confirming justices and ended up breaking the Supreme Court itself. First, they stole Justice Antonin Scalia's seat. After his death, Senate Republicans denied Merrick Garland, President Obama's nominee, a hearing and a vote that he was entitled to. They claimed that they couldn't fill a seat in a presidential election year, even with the election 9 months away. And they kept that seat vacant for 422 days. In early 2017, newly elected President Trump nominated and Senate Republicans confirmed Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Then, in October of 2020, with head-spinning hypocrisy, Senate Republicans and Donald Trump stole the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat, forcing Amy Coney Barrett onto the bench literally as Americans were casting their votes in the presidential elections 9 days before Election Day in 2020. So much for not confirming justices in a presidential year. So we now have 2 justices on the bench who frankly have no right to be there. This Republican court packing has given us partisan justices eager to toss aside decades of precedent to satisfy their deep-pocketed right-wing special interest benefactors. In the years since the Republicans hijacked the court, the American people have suffered at the hands of its illegitimate conservative supermajority. Pregnant people and their families feel the painful real-world consequences of the Dobbs decision overturning Roe versus Wade that took away a bedrock constitutional right. Families have lost lives to the unrepentant scourge of gun violence, feel the court's rebuke in the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, which will only make our communities less safe. And we all feel the deadly impact of the court's decision in West Virginia versus the EPA, which tied the hands of regulators who are trying to shield us and our children from the devastating and fatal environmental effects of the climate crisis. I fear that those cases are just a preview of coming atrocities. Justice Clarence Thomas has turned his attention to other fundamental rights for future attacks. In his Dobbs concurrence, he has targeted the right to use contraception and the right to marry whoever you love. And we look to restore faith in the court. We need to restore faith in the justices as well. As Clarence Thomas is serving on the High Court, we've seen him make a mockery of the public trust. He has refused to recuse himself on cases about efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election, in spite of the fact that his wife was implicated in them. Justice Thomas should resign from the Supreme Court of the United States. We have to remind him that we have a system of constitutional checks and balances, not checks for balances. That is what we must now fight to ensure happens in our country. The court has put all these rights of all Americans, but especially those of people of color, women, immigrants, and LGBTQ rural and low-income communities at risk. But when something is broken, we don't just agonize, we organize. We don't have the luxury of waiting to see if the court will issue radical partisan rulings that shift the foundations of freedom under our feet. We now know it will happen. It's only a question of when and who the court is going to target next. That's because the extremists, right wing, will not stop, but we will not stop either. So let's start with undoing the Republicans' thievery and adding 4 seats to the court. Congress can do it by passing the Judiciary Act, expanding the court is constitutional. Congress has done it before, and Congress must do it again now. And now we will hear from my partner in the House of Representatives, Congressman Hank Johnson, ranking member of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Court's Intellectual Property and the Internet. And then we will hear from Senator Tina Smith, Congressman Adam Schiff, Congresswoman Cori Bush, and then all of the other advocacy groups that are here today. Congressman Hank Johnson.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Great to see you. I want to thank Senator Markey for being my partner in this effort. And today, a 6-3 far-right supermajority on the United States Supreme Court threatens our rights, our democracy, and our planet. To restore our democracy, we must expand the United States Supreme Court, and we must do so now. Republicans captured the court against the will of most Americans. Democrats have won more votes in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections and represent 40 million more people in the Senate, yet Republicans have appointed 15 of the last 19 justices, including by stealing seats in 2016 and 2020. The court's radical right-wing justices have spent years dismantling our democracy, inviting big corporate spending into our elections in the Citizens United case of 2010, demolishing the foundation of the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County in 2013, and allowing partisan gerrymandering in Rucho in 2019. And last year, the court stripped millions of women of their right to an abortion in the Dobbs decision. And they're just getting started, ladies and gentlemen. Congress has the power to legislate how many justices will serve on the nation's highest court. In fact, Congress has changed the number of justices 7 times throughout American history, and it was clear to me that the time has now come to make that adjustment again. We must adjust the numbers. But last session, when I introduced the Judiciary Act, we didn't know as much about the extremism of the court as we do now. Given what we've learned over the last 2 years, I'm even more intent on the need for change, and so are my colleagues. Last session, when I introduced the Judiciary Act, we introduced it with only 2 co-sponsors. This year, I'm introducing the Judiciary Act with 56 original co-sponsors in the House. including my friend Adam Schiff. The court has descended into extremist politics, and we need to save this arrogant court from itself. It has become too partisan so that it no longer reflects the country as a whole. Last year, half of the justices showed up at a Federalist Society dinner where the audience gave them a standing ovation for the Dobbs decision. The court has forgotten that it is accountable to all Americans, not just to the Federalist Society. Over and over, the Supreme Court is toying with our freedoms. Given their lack of restraint in cases like Shelby County, I'm afraid of what else they can do. In the run-up to the 2020 election, the court repeatedly ruled against efforts to make it easier to vote during the pandemic. By repeatedly gutting voting rights, the court is reducing the role of average voters in our elections. And not only that, the Supreme Court is also trying to whitewash history by undoing the civil rights legacy and by continuing to rule as if racism does not exist. And through it all, there is Clarence Thomas, who will erase rights for everyone except for himself. He will keep Loving versus Virginia intact while denying the right to love who and how others want to love. And he will use a wealthy donor's private jet and super yacht, but he will take away your right to vote and your right to make decisions about your health care. And this extremist court will go right along with him. If we don't act, this minority-ruled court is poised to make millions of Americans' lives dramatically worse, erasing workers' rights, repudiating reproductive justice, entrenching white supremacy, denying LGBTQ rights, and preventing us from confronting the climate catastrophe. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's now time. We must expand the court, and we must do so now. And now I yield to the illustrious gentle lady from the state of Minnesota, Ms. Tina Smith.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the fierce advocacy and leadership of Senator Markey and Representative Johnson. Thanks to all of my colleagues, and thanks to the advocates that are gathered here with us today. So I'm here today because I understand that the Supreme Court is an essential foundation for our democracy, and I understand that it is broken. And when you know something is broken in a democracy, you can't just turn away. You have to figure out a way to fix it. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the land. The essential constitutional role, it has the essential constitutional role of being the final arbiter of justice and the Constitution, and to protect the rule of law. And to fulfill this role, it must be trusted by citizens as fair and ethical a judge, as Justice Roberts famously said, to call balls and strikes with neutrality. But today the Supreme Court has become too powerful and too political, doing the work of extreme right-wing conservatives, anti-choice advocates, and corporate interests. For decades, dark money groups, the Federalist Society, and Republicans have been working to politicize the Supreme Court, and now we have this 6-3 majority put there by Donald Trump that has overturned Roe versus Wade, which was the law of the land for over 40 years, to protect the rights of people to make their own decisions about their own lives without the interference of politicians. This court gutted the Voting Rights Act, taking away any accountability for states that disenfranchise their voters. And look at Citizens United, denying the power of Congress to get dark money and the flood of cash out of our politics. And now, behind us, the decision is about to be made in the Burkine case and the Indian Child Welfare Act, which threatens to undermine the basis of tribal sovereignty in this country. The court has been severely damaged by the ethical lapses of Judge Clarence Thomas, who by all accounts has failed to live up to the bare minimum of disclosing the massive gifts and financial support that he and his wife have received from a right-wing billionaire who funds the very dark money groups that have corrupted the court. Justice Clarence Thomas proved what we suspected all along, that the Supreme Court is beholden to right-wing corporate interests and billionaire megadonors. We need to reform the court, and that's why we are reintroducing the Judiciary Act today. It will restore balance to the Supreme Court by adding 4 judges. This is common sense, and it exercises the power the Constitution gives to Congress to set the number of Supreme Court justices. By expanding the court, we can restore balance to the court, repair the damage done by these extreme right-wing partisan groups that do not represent the citizens of this country, and we can protect our democracy. So today, this is a call of action. It is a call to come together, to organize, and to lift up our voices to restore the balance of power and the legitimacy of the Supreme Court of the United States. I now would like everyone to please join me in welcoming Congressman Adam Schiff.
Senator, thank you very much, and I also want to acknowledge the leadership of Ranking Member Johnson, Senator Markey. Thank you for your leadership on this bill and for your continued effort to bring ethics and responsibility back to the Supreme Court. It is absolutely clear that the Supreme Court is in desperate need of reform. The Supreme Court was packed by Mitch McConnell, plain and simple. McConnell refused to appoint an Obama nominee or even give that nominee a hearing and a vote on confirmation under the guise that it was too close to an election. And then what did he and Senate Republicans do while Americans were literally voting for Joe Biden? He jammed through a Republican nominee. Now we must unpack and unstack the Supreme Court because Americans have begun to see the reactionary and partisan agenda pushed by it. Slashed reproductive health care, with the rights to marriage equality and contraceptives potentially up next. The gutting of clean air and water regulations, opening up our elections to even more dark money, dark unaccountable money, and so much more. This bill would add 4 seats to the Supreme Court, helping to restore balance to the court and, we hope, its legitimacy. But we must not stop there. We should institute an enforceable code of ethics. We should implement term limits for justices because the scandals here won't stop until we act. We must take up the Judiciary Act and restore faith in this court. This is not a conservative court, not in a legal sense. A conservative court would have some respect for precedent. This is instead a political and partisan court with a reactionary social agenda. And the only question, Mitch McConnell having packed the court, is will we do anything about it? That's right. Or will we subject an entire generation of Americans to the loss of their rights, dirtier air and dirtier water and dirtier elections? Is that the fate we would have for the next generation? My kids are both in their early 20s, and I am not satisfied that they should have to live under a reactionary Supreme Court for their entire adult lives, and I don't want anyone else's kids to have to suffer that fate. This legislation is clearly constitutional. It is clearly necessary, and I'm proud to co-sponsor this bill and urge my colleagues on the Judiciary Committee to bring it up for immediate consideration. And it is now my great pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Cori Bush. Cori.
Thank you, Representative Schiff, and good afternoon, and thank you to everyone for being here. I am delighted to stand here alongside my colleagues and to be leading the Judiciary Act alongside Senators Markey, Senator Smith, and Ranking Member Johnson, Congressman Schiff, and Ranking Member Nadler. The Supreme Court is a cesspool of corruption and misconduct. Just look at the recent flood of scandals, from Justice Clarence Thomas's failures to disclose lavish trips and gifts from a billionaire benefactor, to Justice Neil Gorsuch selling his property to the head of a major law firm 9 days after being confirmed, to Chief Justice John Roberts' wife raking in millions of dollars by placing lawyers in elite law firms with business before the court. These are just some of the worst, some of the most recent scandals we've seen, but probably not the worst. And they're only the ones that we know about. Because of weak disclosure requirements and the lack of a binding code of conduct for Supreme Court justices, we have no idea how many other scandals are being covered up at this very moment. And let's not pretend that the Supreme Court has ever been a champion of Black and brown communities or other marginalized populations. This is the same court where in the Dred Scott case, a majority comprised of slaveholding judges upheld slavery and ruled that Black people were not U.S. citizens. This is the same court that upheld segregation in the Plessy case. This is the same court that upheld compulsory sterilization against predominantly Black, indigenous, and disabled people in Buck v. Bell. From the start, this court has been an ally of white supremacy. And today, this unaccountable majority on the Supreme Court is issuing decisions that are harming people in my district in St. Louis and everywhere else in this country. Because of the decisions made by this illegitimate court behind me, my constituents cannot access abortion care. They have weaker labor protections. They breathe dirtier air. They are more vulnerable to the gun violence epidemic. They have fewer protections against voter suppression, and they are subjected to a discriminatory and ineffective criminal legal system. That's why court reform is a life or death issue for St. Louis and communities nationwide. This is why we are all standing here today calling on Congress to act, calling on Congress to expand the Supreme Court. Adding more justices will not only help balance the court, it will also add balance between our three branches of government. I'm proud to be co-leading the Judiciary Act alongside my colleagues here today. So as long as I am in Congress, I will push to make sure the needs of the people in my district, starting with those who have the greatest need and those across our country, are not trampled on by corrupt judges who don't care about them. I'm proud to be in this fight. I'm grateful for the advocates here today and my legislative partners here on Capitol Hill, and I look forward to reclaiming our democracy once and for all. Thank you. And now we will call up Senior Vice President of Policy, Campaigns, and Advocacy at Planned Parenthood Action Fund, Jacqueline Ayers.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Glad to be with you. Planned Parenthood is super proud to be able to endorse the Judiciary Act today. Yes. And thank you for, this for our organization. We are always happy to stand next to our civil rights, our environmental rights, our reproductive rights partners, the moment is calling for us to realize that this is necessary, that we have fairness, that we have balance in our Supreme Court. So thank you, Senators Markey, Senators Smith, and Congressman Schiff and Johnson, and Congresswoman Bush for being here today. This is an extremely important piece of legislation. We know because 1 year ago, we saw that this is the very court that stripped us of our rights, and they took away our ability to decide our own future. And being able to gut abortion access and the Roe v. Wade decision, this is, it's more than, this has had ripple effects. We have to talk about what has happened this past year. This past year, we have seen people, because of this court's decision, have restricted access. 19 states now have moved to ban abortion. 1 in 3 women, we know also with more trans and non-binary individuals, LGBTQ people have continually be impacted by this decision. And it's not just abortion rights. We know that, as we've heard today, this is really a chessboard of moving pieces around, whether it's our LGBTQ rights, our ability to who we marry, who we love, our access to birth control. Our fundamental rights and freedoms are on the line with the court being shaped as it is today. So the bottom line is, we know courts are being used as a weapon to take away our rights. And because of systemic racism, discrimination, other forms of institutional racism, we are continuing to see All these actions are disproportionately impacting people of color, the folks who look like me, LGBTQ people, poor people, young people who are at stake. And we know that your rights should not be determined by your zip code or what state a particular legislature has sent to this court to review. We know that the entire system needs to be able to take change. So we have to pass measures like the Judiciary Act. We need to do so with the determination of those who are sitting on this court. We need a Supreme Court that reflects power, reflects what the people actually want to be able to see. And we need to make sure that the Supreme Court is once again returned to a place of being able to serve as the backstop and protect our rights. So Planned Parenthood is proud to endorse this legislation. We appreciate standing alongside our advocates, partners, and members of Congress who are shoulder to shoulder fighting on behalf of our over 2 million patients across the country. And thank you very much for fighting for a court and a system that seeks justice for all. And with that, I'm very pleased to bring up the President and CEO of NARAL Pro-Choice America, Minnie Tamaraju.
All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. Okay, I have remarks here. My team's going to hate this, but I'm going to toss them because I want to just summarize some key points and get out of the way because we've got some amazing folks to hear from. So, what is the common theme between all these issues we've been talking about? Freedom to raise your family free of gun violence, right? Freedom to raise your family with air they can breathe and water they can drink. Freedom to raise your family, my kids to love and marry whoever they want to love, and my freedom to decide if, when, and how to have a family. These fundamental freedoms, what do they all have in common? The majority of Americans support these freedoms. And this court behind us is intent on gutting these freedoms. So we have a problem, folks. When I came on board NARAL Pro-Choice America, and I took a pledge to represent our 4 million members, the first question I got asked is, Minnie, if 8 out of 10 Americans support the legal right to abortion, why are we losing rights? If the majority of Americans are with us like you say they are, and like we're seeing in state after state, ballot initiative after ballot initiative, when we take these issues to the people, they're with us, right? So there's something broken in the system, and you're looking at it, folks. So when these members of Congress came to us and our colleagues and our allies and said, please join this fight to expand the court, honestly, I had nothing to say, but why the heck not, and why didn't we do it yet, right? It's time. It's time. So fundamental reproductive freedoms are connected. These are all reproductive freedom issues, every single one of them. And I just want to remind us, we are the majority, okay? Say it with me. We are the majority. We got to feel that, right? We got to feel that. The right is on our side, folks. The moral imperative is on our side. History is on our side. I want to thank these incredibly brave, courageous, and thoughtful members of Congress behind us for taking on this charge. We are honored to be in this fight. We are grateful to stand with all of you. We're going to keep going state by state, building this case. With that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Doug Lintner from the League of Conservation Voters.
Thank you, Minnie. Thank you to Senator Markey, Senator Smith, Congressman Johnson, Congresswoman Bush, Congressman Schiff, to all our speakers, supporters, and all of you for being here. My name is Doug Lindner, and I am Senior Director of Judiciary and Democracy at the League of Conservation Voters. We are here today on behalf of our millions of members because the most powerful court in the world has been captured. Last year, they made up a vague new principle to curtail EPA authority to fight climate change under the Clean Air Act. This year, they could roll back Clean Water Act protections for millions of miles of streams and half the wetlands in the United States. Next year, they'll consider upending one of the most fundamental doctrines that allows the EPA and other agencies to make decisions based on science and expertise instead of the ideological agendas of unaccountable judges. And they're coming for our voting rights. Again, the MAGA majority on this captured Supreme Court does not work for the American people. They work for big oil and big coal. They work for the Federalist Society. They work for the vote suppressors. They work for the anti-abortion extremists. They work for Leonard Leo and Harlan Crow and Mitch McConnell. They work in bad faith. They work to shake the foundations of our constitutional system in service of the corporations and billionaires and ideological extremists who got them this power. That's right. Power they will hold for the rest of their lives, or until they strategically retire when their side is in the White House. Power that will continue to strike against our environment, our democracy, our reproductive rights, and our civil rights for generations to come, even as the oceans continue to rise and our democracy continues to backslide. Unless we act, unless we mobilize, unless we unite behind the only solution that is clearly constitutional and clearly rises to the occasion, and that is the Judiciary Act of 2023. This is a simple, one-line bill based on constitutional authority Congress has used 7 times before to set the number of justices on the Supreme Court. The time has come to use it again, to expand and rebalance this stolen court with 4 new justices, to protect our rights instead of attacking them. Congress must find the courage to pass this bill, and until they do, we need to fight for it. Join us. And now I have the privilege to introduce Brian Fallon, Executive Director of Demand Justice.
Okay, 3 quick points from me. First, on behalf of our board and staff and our 500,000 supporters nationwide that are all court reform activists, I'd like to thank Senators Markey and Smith for their leadership on this legislation on the Senate side. Thank Ranking Member Johnson and Representatives Schiff and Bush on the House side. As a result of your leadership the last couple of years, we have seen support for this measure skyrocket. 3 out of 4 Democrats say they support court expansion. A plurality of independents say they support court expansion. That's because these lawmakers standing behind me put this piece of legislation on the map, so thank you for that. Secondly, I'd like to take note of our new partners that are up here today from NARAL and Planned Parenthood. I think that this is a game changer. These are 2 organizations that when a ruling like the Dobbs ruling comes out, other lawmakers on Capitol Hill, other organizations in the progressive ecosystem look to these organizations about what to do in response. And so to have Planned Parenthood and NARAL stand here today and say part of the response to the Dobbs ruling needs to be structural reform of the Supreme Court is a game changer. I think it will have a huge ripple effect in terms of building more support. So thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you, Minnie. And then lastly, as we stand here today at the steps of the Supreme Court, right now, as we speak, there's an event with our bus tour in Sacramento, California, the 10th stop in a nationwide tour led by the Just Majority Coalition that is going around the country to make the case for exactly this piece of legislation as well as related reforms like term limits and the Code of Ethics. Every lawmaker that's standing behind me has either already participated in an event in their hometown or is doing so in the weeks to come. Every organization represented here is part of that Just Majority Coalition. And so when people ask how we're going to pass this, that's how we're going to do it. We're going to be out there in the country going community to community making the case about this broken court, and each scandal that emerges from this building puts more wind at our backs in doing so. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions? Yes, sir. Who are you?
I'm David Smith, a journalist from The Guardian. I just wondered what backing, if any, do you have from the President and the White House for this, and how important is that?
Well, we know the White House is very frustrated with this Supreme Court. And what we're in the process of doing is building a national coalition. And again, we're not agonizing, we're organizing. And much like, I will just say this, much like the Green New Deal, much like other movements, we are going to start it by organizing, and then we're just going to move through to ensure that ultimately we're in a position to implement this legislation with votes on the floor of the House and Senate. We only need 51 votes to do this in the Senate, and every single decision is going to help to build the momentum. That's our goal. Yes, ma'am. Can you identify yourself?
Yeah, I'm with Ray Television. We own Western Mass News. I was wondering, how are you going to sell this bill to Republicans, adding 4 more seats under a Democratic president?
It's going to be difficult. Obviously, the special interests have funded this movement to create the thievery which has occurred in stealing the Supreme Court seats. So we know it's not going to be easy, but we were able to pass the largest climate change bill in American history without Republican support. And we just might have to reclaim the legitimacy of the Supreme Court without Republican support. That will ensure that 2024 has this issue on the ballot in every single congressional seat, every single Senate seat in our country. We have to win the votes in order to get this passed. Yep, sure.
And also it's important that Democrats retake the House of Representatives and get the majority, and with a simple majority we will be able to pass the Judiciary Act.
Beautiful. Question? Anybody? Okay.
What do you say to the critics who argue, well, if you add 4 seats now, then stop Republicans adding another 4, and where does this stop?
When a bully steals your lunch money in the schoolyard, you have to do something about it, or else the bully will come back over and over again. So we're in this fight, and we're going to reclaim these seats. We're not going to allow the bully to win. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Corey, thank you so much. Wow, wow, wow. You're great.
Thank you. You too.
Yep.
Very good to see you.
Tina, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. You guys are great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. Great. Let me go over here. Thank you for joining. Thank you.